16 at 32 hours, February 19th, 1991, southern Iraq. The desert heat ripples at altitude. 30,000 feet above, Major Yuri Gromov scans the horizon from his MiG-23 MLD, a graduate of the Krasnodar Higher Military Aviation School, top of his class, decorated for aerial excellence. He was trained to outmaneuver, to close, to kill within sight. Every drill, every textbook, every dogfight simulation taught him the same truth: combat belongs to the skilled. His radar screen is clean, no lock warnings, no spikes, nothing but open air. Then a flicker, then nothing. And then impact. The cockpit jolts sideways, no warning tone, no missile trail, no time to react. The right wing disintegrates. Flames spiral down the fuselage. Gromov ejects a split second before the aircraft splits in two, descending beneath the chute. He never sees his attacker. An American F-15 had launched an AIM-7 Sparrow from 46 kilometers away, guided by AWACS, invisible to Gromov's radar, resolved and fired before his system even registered a threat. No visual, no maneuver, no fight. A sniper shot in an arena built for swords. He trained for turning battles, angles, G-force, guns. The Americans never got close. On the ground, as Iraqi officers retrieved Gromov from the sand, he asked the only question that mattered. Where was the fight? There wasn't one. Moscow trained warriors. The Americans sent calculators. And that day, the math killed faster than the man ever could. Krasnodar Higher Military Aviation School, 1985. Instructors walk the halls in pressed uniforms, quoting kill ratios from Vietnam and maneuvers from MiG manuals older than their students. On the tarmac, students practice snap rolls and tight loops. Inside the classroom, chalk traces turning radii and missile ranges lines of physics drawn by men who had seen war up close. Colonel Anatoly Yevdokimov stands at the front. A veteran of Vietnam, MiG-21 ace, 6 kills confirmed. His voice is gravel, his lessons doctrine. Dogfighting is an art. The Americans have computers. You have instincts. Laughter follows, not mockery confidence. The school teaches air combat the Soviet way: merge first, maneuver second, fire third. Radar is a tool to close the distance. Missiles are backup. Guns are final judgment. They dismissed BVR beyond visual range as a fantasy. No pilot fires from 50 kilometers. Yevdokimov scoffs. You need to see the whites of his eyes, not the color of his data. Flight training reinforces it. Students memorize merge protocols, engage in visual ID drills, and rehearse cannon shots at 400 meters. American tactics, cowardice by technology, they call it. Visual range is where honor lives. Close combat is where aces are made. One instructor waves off the growing talk of digital systems. Let them automate, he says. They'll forget how to fly. Graduates leave Krasnodar ready for World War II in the jet age. What they don't know is that by the time they see the enemy, it will already be too late. The Americans aren't training for the merge. They're designing to delete it. They taught knife fighting. The Americans brought sniper rifles. Soviet air combat doctrine was built on movement, muscle, and mastery of the merge, from Korea to Vietnam. Soviet-trained pilots had turned close-range engagements into deadly games of geometry. The assumption was clear air combat would always come down to maneuver. The winner would be the one who saw first, turned faster, and fired better. That assumption became doctrine. The core of VVS air strategy was the visual kill chain. A pilot detected the enemy via radar, closed distance, visually confirmed identity, and engaged. Radar was not a weapon. It was a pointer, a flashlight before the blade. Dogfights were sacred. The ideal engagement range under 5 kilometers, ideally within cannon range. Missiles were seen as unreliable, easily jammed, often evaded. Guns were truth. Every generation of aircraft and pilot carried this mindset forward. The MiG-21, the MiG-23. Even the advanced MiG-29 was designed with close combat in mind, high thrust. Helmet-mounted sights, infrared-guided missiles best used under visual lock. General Streltsov, chief of VVS doctrine in the 1980s, once said, "Machines assist, but the man wins the fight." That was the flaw. By 1991, the battlefield had shifted. American F-15s didn't wait for visual. They didn't chase blips. They hunted data. Their rules of engagement allowed firing before merge. Their IFF systems sorted targets digitally. Their radar didn't just search it, targeted, tracked, and killed at distance. The Soviets trained their pilots to fight in a ring. The Americans turned the ring into a map and erased it before anyone got in. They trained to see the enemy. The enemy had already fired. Iraqi MiG-29 scrambles north of Basra. Pilot trained in Krasnodar, logged 700 hours, top of his class. AWACS detects climb, altitude 2,000 meters, speed climbing to Mach 0.9. 16:33:24 F-15C receives intercept vector, distance 46 kilometers, altitude match confirmed. 16:33:41 MiG radar sweeps, finds nothing, no spike, no signal, skies clear. 16:34:00 F-15 launches AIM-7M Sparrow, medium range, radar guided, impact window 28 seconds. 16:34:03 MiG pilot hears nothing, no RWR tone, no tracking alert, no time to react. 16:34:30 missile impact, starboard engine shreds, debris arcs into sky, MiG spirals downward. 16:35:00 Iraqi GCI receives Mayday call. Pilot ejects, never sees his attacker. American jets vanish back into the network. No gunfight, no turn, no closure. When the wreckage is recovered, Soviet advisors inspect the remains. No radar lock confirmed. No dogfight logged. Kill range nearly 50 kilometers. They check the pilot's credentials. Graduate of Krasnodar, higher military aviation school. Top honors, simulated 6 kills in training. Fluent in doctrine. He never saw the American. The advisor notes perfect execution of close-range defense. Irrelevant in this engagement. Back in Moscow, the phrase repeats, irrelevant. All his training, all his drills, all his maneuvers, rendered meaningless in less than 30 seconds. The best pilot, they had never saw his killer and never got the fight he was trained for. The reports landed on Moscow desks within days. 5 MiG losses, 4 before radar contact, all outside visual range, no American casualties. But the official response wasn't panic, it was dismissal. Air Marshal Sidorov, head of VVS training, issued a directive attribution to operator error or equipment malfunction. No doctrinal adjustments required. Internal notes blamed Iraqi panic under pressure. One general wrote, "They flew low. Their radar discipline was poor. Their evasion inadequate." Another claimed the Americans fired lucky shots, not reliable tactics. A classified memo circulated through Krasnodar radar failure, likely, reaffirm importance of close-range discipline. Emphasize visual confirmation. No revisions, no new theory, no change, because to admit the system failed would mean more than embarrassment. It would mean the doctrine was broken and the classroom was wrong. Sidorov refused to rewrite the training manuals. He'd helped author them. He'd overseen 3 generations of fighter curriculum. If graduates were dying before they saw the enemy, it wasn't the doctrine, it was the pilot. Behind closed doors, junior officers questioned the logic. One noted, if they're dying outside visual range, why are we teaching them to close? He was reassigned. At Krasnodar, instructors doubled down. More dogfight hours, more gunnery practice, more theory on missile evasion after radar lock. They taught harder. They just didn't teach different. The truth was simple and unbearable. They ignored the kill report because it didn't match the lesson plan. With losses mounting and visual range kills non-existent, the first alternative theory emerged: the Americans weren't fighting fair. Soviet analysts proposed a novel idea, phantom locks. They theorized the U.S. was using laser-based range spoofing, projecting false radar signatures into MiG systems, forcing misreads, or worse, masking their actual position. Another theory blamed ground-based jammers. Iraqi defense sites could have been compromised. If American EW platforms had breached the frequency bands, they could have blinded the MiGs entirely. The conclusion: the kills weren't real, they were illusions created by superior deception. Krasnodar responded by updating training modules. Cadets now practiced under simulated jamming. Red teams introduced false radar spikes. Lectures warned of ghost locks and false merges. Pilots were drilled to delay commitment, to reacquire targets visually before trusting their sensors, to outwit the trick. They taught that technology couldn't be trusted. That skill would always prevail. But the theory was flawed. Electronic warfare could jam radar. Yes, it could deceive systems, but it couldn't guide a missile. The AIM-7M that downed those MiGs wasn't spoofed into flight. It tracked, locked, and killed clean. There was no jamming signal, no ground distortion. The missile's radar was active. Its guidance was real. The enemy wasn't masking themselves. They were simply beyond detection. They trained to jam the signal. But the signal wasn't there. It was data. Invisible. Clean and lethal. As the air losses continued, a second theory surfaced, more sophisticated, more comfortable. Soviet planners suggested the F-15s weren't acting alone. The new explanation: coordinated attacks between fighters and AWACS aircraft. The F-15s, they claimed, were not detecting MiGs directly. They were receiving remote intercept vectors from airborne command platforms, launching based on third-party targeting. Instructors at Krasnodar pivoted. The problem, they now said, wasn't missile range. It was American teamwork. They imagined complex choreography decoys flying high to bait radar, stealth platforms feeding data, AWACS orchestrating engagements like an air conductor. The F-15 was no longer a single threat. It was a node in a broader net. This made sense to Soviet command. They were trained to think in terms of formations, of squadron-level tactics. If the Americans had simply improved their coordination, then the solution was better coordination on their part. New drills were introduced. Wing pairs practiced evasive launches. Simulated AWACS targets were added to training maps. Cadets were taught to look not just for the enemy fighter, but for the invisible eye above it. They thought they had found the answer. But they missed the revolution. The problem wasn't just coordination, it was integration. The Americans weren't working in formations. They were operating as a system. Each aircraft, each radar, each missile connected, sharing data, updating targets in real time, erasing the traditional delay between detection and decision. The Soviets trained for what they could see. The Americans weaponized what they couldn't. And the deeper the Soviets searched for formations, the more they misunderstood the future. They studied the shape. The Americans erased it with information. By spring 1991, the intelligence community stepped in. GRU teams arrived in Baghdad to collect black boxes from downed MiGs. KGB liaisons debriefed surviving Iraqi pilots. Every scrap of radar data, every comms intercept, every missile fragment was logged and flown back to Moscow. They called it Operation Raketnaya Tishina Missile Silence, because that's what the pilots reported. No lock tones, no radar warnings, just silence and then detonation. The findings stunned them. Multiple MiGs were destroyed at ranges exceeding 40 kilometers. In most cases, the pilots had no chance to respond. In several, the engagements happened below the horizon, American missiles fired from beyond line of sight, guided by AWACS or F-15 onboard systems. Radar logs showed no spike. The detection threshold was never crossed. The attacks happened in a space Soviet doctrine didn't recognize before the merge, before the reaction window, before the dogfight. The GRU compiled a classified report. F-15 platforms engaged targets outside radar warning parameters. Standard evasion impossible. Engagements terminated before visual detection. Captain Orlov, an aerospace analyst assigned to the GRU task force, submitted a chilling line: "Our fighters do not lose fights." They are not present in them. The Americans weren't outmaneuvering. They were out-detecting. The Soviets had spent decades building pilots who could turn tighter, fire faster, shoot straighter, but none of that mattered if the enemy fired first from a place the MiG couldn't even see. They mapped the wreckage. They logged the failures. But they still hadn't located the true weapon, because the weapon wasn't the F-15, it was the network. The American Revolution in air combat didn't come from better pilots. It came from systems that redefined the fight. Technology 1, look-down, shoot-down radar, AN/APG-63 Soviet doctrine, assumed a radar couldn't detect low-flying targets through ground clutter. That was true for them. The F-15's radar changed everything. Its pulse Doppler system filtered out terrain noise, tracking fighters flying at treetop level. MiG-23s tried to hug the earth. The F-15 saw through it. Result: altitude became a liability. Technology 2, AIM-7M Sparrow Beyond Visual Range Missile. Soviets relied on infrared missiles needing rear aspect locks. The AIM-7M used active radar homing, engaging head-on targets at over 50 kilometers. MiG radars never saw the lock. The pilots never heard the tone. Result: first warning came with detonation. Technology 3, AWACS Plus. Fighter integration, Soviet GCI told pilots where to fly. American AWACS told them where to shoot. The E-3 Sentry gave a real-time 360-degree air picture, vectoring F-15s to intercepts before enemy radar even lit up. Result: Americans entered fights with full knowledge. Soviets entered blind. Technology 4, IFF Plus. Beyond visual ROE Soviet rules of engagement confirm visually before firing. American IFF identification, friend or foe systems enabled digital confirmation, no visual required. F-15s could legally and ethically fire from 40-plus kilometer without ever seeing the target. Result: kill confirmed before dogfight began. Technology 5, digital fire control and HUD. MiG pilots entered targets manually. F-15s had real-time HUDs synced to radar and missile telemetry. Reaction time wasn't seconds, it was milliseconds. Result: Soviets trained to react. Americans didn't have to. At the center was not a plane, but a system. Kill chains ran from satellite to AWACS to pilot to missile-fused, fast, and final. Credential drop number 6, Lieutenant Cole. David Deptula, Chief Air Campaign Planner, summed it up. We didn't outfly them. We outlinked them. The Soviets trained for combat. The Americans redesigned it. They weren't flying jets. They were flying data. February 1991, the air campaign begins. AWACS detects Iraqi scramble. MiG-29 north of Basra. 0400-15. F-15 vectored to intercept. Range 42 kilometers. Altitude 3,000 meters. So-432. Sparrow launched. So-436. MiG radar silent. Pilot unaware. A401, A05. Kill confirmed. Wreckage falls before the MiG's radar registered a threat. Same minute. Second MiG climbs from a different airfield. 0401-14. F-15 adjusts course mid-flight based on live AWACS update. 0401-30. Second Sparrow away. 0401-58. Impact. No visual contact made. 6 minutes into the operation, 4 MiGs destroyed. No dogfight, no countermaneuvers, no American losses. By the 72-hour mark, 41 Iraqi fighters had been downed. Over 75% never saw their attacker. Most were destroyed at ranges exceeding 30 kilometers. The Soviet-trained pilots flew perfectly. They just flew into the past. These were graduates of the finest air academies Moscow ever built. Pilots who had logged thousands of hours in close combat drills, gunnery loops, radar avoidance. None of it mattered, because by the time they engaged, the engagement was over. Reversal lines. They trained for turning fights. They died in straight lines. They trained for sight. The Americans trained to fire without it. They trusted instincts. The Americans trusted links. Final credential. Drop NATO post-operation summary. Soviet air doctrine failed to adapt to network-centric warfare. No corrective engagement possible under current training models. This wasn't combat. It was deletion. By the time they saw the dogfight, they were already dead. The after-action analysis within the Soviet Air Force was unlike anything before it. No tales of heroic duels, no maneuver replays, no kill ratios to spin, just a cold, unbroken fact. Their best pilots never got a chance. The doctrine had failed not at the edges, but at the core. Failure 1, pilot-centric versus network-centric. They trained individuals to win fights. The Americans trained systems to win wars. The pilot wasn't the sensor. He was the trigger. The thinking happened elsewhere above, beyond, faster. Failure 2. Maneuver versus sensor fusion. Soviet air schools worshipped agility. F-15s didn't turn. They tracked. Through radar, AWACS, satellite, and IFF seamless vision across sky and time. Failure 3. Objects versus systems. Soviets built aircraft. Americans built kill chains. Each U.S. fighter was just a piece tied to a broader web that planned, sensed, and struck as one. Failure 4. Skill versus integration. Dogfighting rewarded reflexes. The Americans rewarded connection. They didn't need to outfly. They just needed to outknow. A quiet report was circulated to the VVS General Staff. Our doctrine rewards survival inside the merge. Their system prevents the merge from existing. It was a philosophical collapse. One instructor at Krasnodar, after reading the report, whispered to a colleague, "We taught them to kill with their eyes. The Americans killed with their network." Change began. New curricula proposed. Radar theory re-examined. AWACS simulated in class, but it was too late. The war was over, and the classroom was exposed. They built aces. America built kill chains. Southern Iraq, a forgotten airstrip. Winds whip across the sand. In the corner of a crumbling hangar sits a MiG-23UB, a twin-seat trainer. Canopy cracked, dials frozen in rust. Cockpit open to the sky it once challenged. Once, this jet trained elite. Pilots who could thread through SAM fire, lock onto heat signatures,